Welcome. For this video, I will be introducing to you some prominent persecuted Christians from 1st century to 21st century. For the 1st century, we have Apostle Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples. Peter was a fisherman whom Jesus called to be a disciple, and he became a leading figure in the early church. After Jesus' resurrection, Peter boldly preached the gospel throughout Jerusalem and eventually in Rome. His ministry drew the anger of both Jewish authorities and later the Roman government because he refused to stop proclaiming Jesus as Lord. During Nero's persecution of Christians, Peter was arrested and sentenced to death. Early church tradition records that he requested to be crucified upside down because he did not consider himself worthy to die in the same manner as Jesus. For the 2nd century, we have Polycarp of Smyrna. He was a bishop of Smyrna and was deeply respected for preserving the apostolic teaching he learned from John. During a wave of Roman hostility toward Christians, he was arrested because he refused to offer incense to Caesar and acknowledge him as Lord. When pressured to deny Christ and save his life, he famously replied, 86 years have I served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me? The authorities attempted to burn him alive, but early records say that flames did not immediately consume him, so he was eventually killed by the sword. His martyrdom became one of the earliest and most influential examples of Christian courage and faithfulness under persecution. Around 3rd century, we have Origen from Alexandria, who was a Christian teacher whose deep scholarship shaped early Christian theology. And during Emperor Decius' empire-wide crackdown on Christian leaders around AD 250, Origen was arrested because of his high influence and refusal to renounce Christ. Eusebius records that he was stretched on the rock, chained, and threatened with being burned alive unless he offered pagan sacrifice, but he refused. Although he was eventually released when the persecution eased, the brutality left him severely weakened. He died a few years later, widely regarded as a confessor, one who suffered for Christ without renouncing the faith. Athanasius became the central figure in the controversies following the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD because of his uncompromising defense of the full divinity of Christ. His opponents, especially the Arians, accused him of political crimes, leading to multiple exiles ordered by emperor sympathetic to Arian theology. Despite these pressures, he continued writing influential works like On the Incarnation, strengthening the theological foundation of Nicene Christianity. His repeated removals from Alexandria often involved threats, mob violence, and imperial force, showing how deeply theological disputes were tied to imperial politics. Around 5th century, John Chrysostom became famous in Antioch for his powerful preaching that emphasized moral reform, social justice, and pastoral care. After becoming Archbishop of Constantinople in 398 AD, he boldly confronted abuses of wealth and power, which angered many in the imperial court. His criticism of lavish lifestyles and his reforms among the clergy provoked Empress Theodosia and other political enemies, leading to his first exile in 403 AD after the Synod of Oak. Although briefly restored due to public outcry, he was exiled again in 404 AD, this time to remote regions under harsh conditions. His final forced relocation, intended to break his health, led to his exhaustion and death in 407 AD, making him one of the most notable persecuted bishops of the early church. Around 6th century, Pope John I was sent by King Theodoric to Constantinople in 525 to 526 AD to negotiate reduced oppression of Arians under Emperor Justin I. Though the mission succeeded diplomatically, Theodoric grew paranoid that John had conspired with the emperor against him. Upon his return to Italy, Theodoric accused him of treason and had him imprisoned in Ravenna. In captivity, John was denied proper food and care, and the harsh conditions weakened him severely. He died in prison on May 18, 526, and he is venerated as a martyr because he died as a direct result of political religious persecution. Around 7th century, Maximus openly opposed the official Byzantine position of monothelitism, which sought to unify the empire but compromised Orthodox Christology. Because of his resistance, he was arrested multiple times and brought before imperial and ecclesiastical tribunals that pressured him to accept the imperial doctrine. When he refused, he was brutally punished. His tongue was cut out and his right hand was amputated to silence his teaching. Around 8th century, we have Abu of Tiflis. He originally lived as a Muslim in Baghdad but became deeply impressed by the Christian faith during his time in Tbilisi, which was under Muslim rule. After years of private study, he openly professed Christianity and was baptized in Georgia. This public conversion was considered a capital of offense under Islamic law, especially in a region controlled by the Abbasid Caliphate. When arrested, Abu boldly refused all offers to return to Islam and declared that he would rather die than deny Christ. He was executed by beheading on January 6, 786 AD, and is remembered in Georgian Christianity as one of its most significant early martyrs. Around 9th century, we have Saint Aria of Cordoba, who was born into a Christian family but was raised for many years within an Islamic environment because of political pressures on her family. After practicing Christianity, she eventually made a public confession of her faith, which brought her before the Muslim judge. The judge showed leniency and encouraged her to return to Islam, but after continued refusal, she was arrested again. When brought to trial a second time, Aria steadfastly declared a follower of Christ and rejected the option of recanting. She was then executed, becoming one of the notable martyrs of Cordoba, whose witness strengthened the Christian community under severe religious pressure. 10th century marks the persecution of Saint Alphege of Canterbury. He was seized when Vikings forces attacked Canterbury, taking him prisoner and demanding an enormous ransom from the English people. He refused the payment because he did not want his poor flock to suffer under the heavy financial burden. During his captivity, he continued to minister to prisoners and even converted some of the Vikings guarding him. After months of pressure, the Vikings, angered by his refusal, dragged him out and brutally killed him with stones and axes during a drunken feast. He died and is honored as a martyr. Around 11th century, Peter of Blois was persecuted. First, he preached throughout province for about 20 years, challenging key doctrines and rituals of medieval Roman Church. His message gained a following but also provoked strong opposition from local clergy. According to Peter the Venerable, Peter's destruction of crosses as objects of veneration enraged the populace. He was seized by a mob and burned alive. His death is considered a case of religious persecution because he was killed for preaching doctrines outside the accepted church structure and refusing to recant. In 12th century, we have Peter Abelard, whose innovative approach to theology and use of reason challenged traditional scholastic methods, provoking suspicion among established church leaders. In 1121, the Council of Soissons condemned his work on the Trinity, forced him to burn his own book, and required him to live under monastic supervision. His most powerful opponent, Bernard of Clairvaux, later pressed new accusation against him, leading to another condemnation for heresy at the Council of Sens in 1140. After this judgment, Abelard was forbidden to teach publicly and sought refuge at the Abbey of Cluny under Peter the Venerable. Although not physically tortured or executed, Abelard suffered significant intellectual and ecclesiastical persecution that silenced his teaching and deeply affected the final years of his life. Around 13th century, we have Ramon Llull, who committed himself to missionary work among Muslims, believing that Christianity should be defended through reasoned debate rather than force. He traveled several times to North Africa, including Tunis and Bitaya, where he openly preached Christianity despite the danger. During his final mission, his public preaching angered local authorities and crowds, leading to his being attacked and stoned by a mob. Sailors rescued him and brought him back toward Mallorca, but he succumbed to his wounds and died. In the 14th century, we have here John Wycliffe, who taught at Oxford and argued that scripture, not the papacy, was the supreme authority for Christian life, which brought him into conflict with church leaders. His translation of the Bible into English and the training of itinerant preachers, the law lords, spread ideas the church considered dangerous. Several church councils, including the Blackfriars of Synod of 1382 AD, condemned his teaching on the sacraments and ecclesiastical authority. After his death, opposition intensified, culminating in the Council of Constance, formally declaring him a heretic, ordering his writings destroyed and his remains exhumed and burned. In 15th century, we have John Hus, who preached in Prague against clerical corruption, the sale of indulgences, and called for the church to return to biblical authority, ideas that made him a leading voice of reform in Bohemia. His growing influence alarmed church authorities, leading to multiple excommunications and political pressures that forced him into exile. When he traveled to Council of Constance under imperial safe conduct, he expected a fair hearing but was instead arrested and imprisoned for months. Despite intense pressure, Hus refused to deny his teaching unless proven wrong from scripture. He was condemned and burned at the stake, praying and singing until his death, becoming one of the most significant martyrs of pre-Reformation Europe, and he was also called the precursor of Reformation, along with John Wycliffe. In 16th century, we have William Tyndale, who believed that scripture should be available to every believer and famously declared that even a plowboy should know more of the Bible than the clergy who post its translation. His translation worked him a target, forcing him to flee England and continue his work in Germany and the Low Countries. Church and state authorities pursued him relentlessly, and he was betrayed, arrested near Antwerp in 1535, and held in harsh imprisonment for over a year. Despite pressure, he refused to stop his translation work or recant his belief. In 17th century, John Bunyan emerged. He began preaching during a time when non-Anglican gatherings were illegal under the Clarendon Code, making him a target for local authorities. He was arrested in 1660 simply for preaching the gospel without government permission, an act considered a criminal offense. When offered release on the condition that he stop preaching, Bunyan refused, saying he could not be silent about Christ. He spent 12 years in Bedford jail, where he wrote several books including the early parts of the Pilgrim's Progress. In the 8th century, we have here George Whitefield, whose powerful preaching drew huge crowds but is also angered many established Anglican clergy, leading to widespread bans on him preaching inside churches. As a result, he preached outdoors, where he was often met with violent mobs who threw stones, dirt, and even dead animals at him as he proclaimed the gospel. Critics accused him of emotionalism, disorderliness, and disrupting traditional church life, and he endured slander from both religious and political leaders. Despite this opposition, Whitefield continued traveling thousands of miles across Britain and American colonies to preach Christ. His perseverance under persecution helped fuel the Great Awakening and made him one of the most influential evangelists in Protestant history. In the 19th century, we have Charles Spurgeon, who warned the Baptist Union was drifting into theological liberalism, abandoning key doctrines such as the inspiration of Scripture and the deity of Christ. His public stance sparked the downgrade of controversy, resulting in newspaper, pastors, and denominational leaders ridiculing him and accusing him of divisiveness. Despite his stature, the Baptist Union voted to officially censure him in 1888, the only censure of his ministry deeply wounding him emotionally and spiritually. Spurgeon bore this opposition while maintaining his convictions, insisting that loyalty to Scripture outweighed institutional approval. In the 20th century marks the persecution of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who openly opposed the Nazi regime from its earliest years, denouncing Hitler's perversion of both state and church and helping found the Confessing Church, which resisted Nazi control. His involvement with the resistance deepened as he joined efforts to oppose Hitler, using his theological convictions to justify active opposition to tyranny. He was arrested by the Gestapo for his activities connecting to helping Jews escape and for the links to anti-Hitler conspirators. In April 1943, he spent 2 years in various prisoners and concentration camps, where he continued to minister to fellow prisoners and write letters expressing deep Christian faith. After the failed July 20 plot, Bonhoeffer was condemned and hanged on April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender, becoming one of the most respected Christian martyrs of the 20th century. And the most recent is in the 21st century. We have here Pastor Wang Yi, who was a former legal scholar and public intellectual before converting to Christianity, after which he became a leading advocate for an independent, biblically faithful church in China. His church, Early Rain Covenant Church, openly rejected Communist Party, something illegal in China, which drew intense government scrutiny. On December 9, 2018, he and more than 100 church members were arrested in a coordinated raid, and he later disappeared into secret detention for months. In December 2019, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison, one of the harshest punishment given to a Chinese pastor in recent decades, for refusing to submit the church to state control. This timeline shows how, across centuries, God has raised men and women who stood firm for the truth despite pressure, opposition, and persecution. Their stories remind us that faithfulness often comes with a cost, but also with lasting impact. As we look at their lives, may we be encouraged to stand boldly for Christ in our generation, trusting that God is still at work in every season of history. Thank you so much for watching.